Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I spent 12 years in mental health care before I ever stepped into a supervisory role. I started as a floor tech at a small outpatient clinic right after college. I didn't have a fancy degree or connections. I just showed up every shift, learned everything I could, and worked my way up the hard way. By the time I landed a supervisor position at a psychiatric hospital, I had seen enough of the field to know what mattered and what didn't. What mattered was having enough people on the floor to keep patients safe. What didn't matter, apparently, was how the hospital's leadership chose to spend its money. That was a lesson they taught me themselves. The hospital I worked at was not a small operation. It had multiple units, a large patient census, and a revolving door of administrators who came in every few years convinced they had found the magic formula to fix the budget. The formula was always the same: cut staffing costs, never the supply contracts, never the generous salaries for the people sitting in corner offices, never the money that went into redecorating the front lobby for the third time in 5 years, or moving the admissions department to yet another location down the hall because someone decided the old spot wasn't efficient enough. It was always the people on the floor who paid the price. The pool of qualified staff willing to work in a psychiatric setting is not large. That is just the reality of the field. The work is hard, emotionally draining, and the pay for the lower-level technicians is not something you brag about at dinner. So when shifts needed to be filled, especially on nights and weekends, the same small group of dedicated techs kept showing up. Some of them were working 60, 70, even 80 hours a week. They did it because they needed the money and because they cared about the patients. The overtime was not a luxury, it was the only thing keeping the floors staffed to the legal minimum. Then came the memo. All supervisors were called into a meeting and told in no uncertain terms that overtime was finished. Not reduced, not managed more carefully, finished. The chief financial officer stood at the front of the room and made it very clear that any supervisor who approved overtime would be answering for it personally. I sat there thinking about the weekend shifts I was already dreading and said nothing. There was no point. The decision had already been made by people who had never once stood on a unit floor at 2 in the morning trying to figure out how to keep a patient from hurting themselves with one tech short. The first real test came a few weeks later. I was covering a weekend and 3 staff called out on the same night. I spent 2 hours on the phone going through the entire roster. Nobody would come in without overtime. I had 2 techs from the in-house pool at regular rate, which helped, but I still needed one more body to hit the minimum staffing requirement. After exhausting every other option, I approved overtime for 1 full-time tech, 1 person, for 1 night. When time cards came in for a payroll review, you would have thought I had embezzled from the retirement fund. The chief financial officer called me in and told me directly that, if it happened again, I would be receiving a formal, written reprimand. I thanked him and walked back to my office. On the way back, I started doing math in my head. A tech on overtime cost $4 less per hour than a pool-registered nurse at straight time. And both of those options cost a fraction of what a nursing agency charged. Agency nurses came with a markup built right in because the agency covered background checks, licensing verification, and training. You were not just paying the nurse's salary, you were paying the agency's profit on top of it. The chief financial officer, with his accounting degree and his memo, had just made agency nurses my only compliant option. The next pay period came and the same problem showed up on a Friday. I needed 3 techs to hit minimum staffing on Friday night and again on Saturday. Nobody on the roster would take the shifts at straight time. I picked up the phone and called the most expensive nursing agency in the city. I told them I needed 3 registered nurses for Friday and Saturday nights at night shift differential and weekend rate, and asked them to confirm they could cover both nights. They confirmed without hesitation. I sent a message to the other weekend and evening supervisors explaining what I had done and letting them know the same approach applied to any call-ins for the rest of the schedule. If a shift needed filling and no one would come in without overtime, the agency was the answer. Every shift, no exceptions. If a patient required a one-to-one sitter for constant observation due to extreme suicide risk, that shift went to the agency too. When that same morning the police initiated a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric observation hold on a patient, that patient needed eyes on them every single minute. No medical skills required, just a warm body that could sit in the room and watch. We filled that shift with an agency-registered nurse at full weekend rate with night differential. Word got around to the regular staff quickly. Once they figured out that the agency was picking up all the extra hours, the call-ins started coming in faster. People who might have picked up a shift at straight time decided to stay home instead. By the end of the pay period, the agency was covering nearly half of all staffed hours on the floor. Licensed practical nurses and registered nurses were everywhere, doing jobs that a tech could have done for a quarter of the price. When the pay period closed and the time cards landed on the payroll desk alongside the agency invoice, the total salary cost for those 2 weeks came in at over 300% of what was budgeted. The nursing director called me that afternoon and asked me to walk him through what had happened with staffing costs that period. I told him everything. I said that after being warned that approving overtime would result in disciplinary action, I made sure I stayed compliant, and that the only available option left to me was the agency. Then I told him something I had kept to myself until that moment. I mentioned that I had never brought up to the chief financial officer that a technician on overtime actually costs $4 less per hour than a pool-registered nurse at straight time, and that both of those options were considerably cheaper than what the agency charged. I told the nursing director that I could have saved the hospital a significant amount of money, but I assumed that the chief financial officer's accounting background gave him a better grasp of the numbers than mine did. The line went quiet for a moment. The other supervisors gave nearly identical answers when they were asked the same question. By the end of that same day, a new memo came through. Overtime was approved again, provided that supervisors followed certain financial guidelines when making staffing decisions. The chief financial officer went back to his spreadsheets. The rest of us went back to running our floors the way we always had, the way that actually worked. I became a mom at 20. It wasn't planned, but the moment I held my son for the first time, I knew I would do anything for him. My husband is a good man. He loves our son and does everything he can when he's around, but his job takes him away a lot. Long stretches, sometimes weeks at a time. So for 2 years, it was mostly just me and my boy. Every feeding, every tantrum, every sleepless night, every trip to the park, every bath time, every mommy at 2 in the morning. I love my son more than anything, but I was running on empty. When my friend suggested a girls' beach trip, I almost cried. My husband happened to have time off, so for the first time since my son was born, I could actually leave him in safe hands for a whole night. The first time in 2 years I would be completely on my own. No diaper bag, no snacks to pack, no one calling my name every 5 minutes. I was counting down the days. Now my friend had a little boy the same age as mine. She decided to bring him on the trip, and honestly, nobody in our group had a problem with that. Kids come along sometimes. That's life. But here's the thing about my friend. She has this habit. Whenever we all hang out, she kinda just disappears into her phone. She zones out, wanders off, and quietly slides her kid toward whoever is nearest. It happened at birthday parties. It happened at casual get-togethers. It happened every single time. We all noticed it. Nobody really said anything because, she's our friend and her kid is sweet. But we all noticed. So there we were. Beach, sunshine, salt air, the first real breath of freedom I had taken in 2 years. I sat down in the sand, felt the warmth on my face, and just let myself exist for a moment without someone needing something from me. It felt incredible. It lasted maybe 20 minutes. Her son toddled over to me with his little hands outstretched, asking me to play with him and walk with him. All the usual kid stuff. I looked over at my friend. She was sitting about 10 feet away, fully locked into her phone, thumbs moving fast, completely checked out. I smiled at the little boy and gently redirected him back to his mother, telling him she would love to play with him and that he should go to her. He ran back to her. She barely looked up. She gave him a snack, patted his head, and went right back to her phone. 2 minutes later, he was back in front of me, tugging at my sleeve and asking me to go walk with him down by the water. I tried again, telling him that his mommy would love to take that walk with him and that he should go get her. This time, my friend actually looked up, but not to come get her son. She looked up just long enough to wave me off and tell me I was fine before going right back to her screen. He walked back to her again. I watched her pick him up, bounce him for about 30 seconds, then set him right back down and point in my direction. He came back to me. At this point, I was no longer feeling the sunshine. I was tense. I looked at my friend again, hoping she would read the room. She did not read the room. She was back on her phone. I walked over to her and sat down next to her, keeping my voice calm. I told her that I loved her little boy, she knew that, but that I had come here to get a break and asked if she could hang with him for a while. She barely looked up. She told me he liked me more, and that I was just better with kids than she was anyway. I asked her to repeat what she said because I genuinely did not understand how she could say that with a straight face. She doubled down without even blinking. She said I had so much more patience with kids than she did and asked me to just play with him for a little while, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. I sat there for a second just staring at her. She went back to scrolling. Her son was pulling on my sleeve, and something in me just snapped clean in half. I told her straight out that I had left my own child at home that night because I needed one night without being somebody's caretaker, and that I was not going to spend it babysitting her kid while she sat on her phone. She finally put the phone down and looked at me like I had said something offensive. She told me I was making it too serious and that he was only 2 years old. I told her she was right, he was 2, which was exactly why his mother should be the one watching him instead of handing him off to me every 5 minutes. She tried to walk it back a little, saying she wasn't handing him off and that she just figured I wouldn't mind. I told her I minded a lot actually. I told her she did this every single time we all hung out, that she would check out and let everyone else deal with her kid, and that tonight I was not going to be that person. She crossed her arms and said she couldn't believe I was acting like this over a toddler. I told her then to watch her toddler, to stop being lazy, and to parent her own child. The words came out sharp and I meant every one of them. The rest of the group had gone quiet. Nobody jumped in to defend her. A couple of them actually nodded. One of my other friends leaned over and quietly told her that I was right and that she did this all the time. That hit her harder than anything I said. Karen's face went red. She snatched up her son, grabbed her bag, and spent the rest of the evening sulking at the far end of the group, shooting me looks every now and then. But here's what actually made the night perfect. Once she knew nobody was going to swoop in and save her from having to parent, she actually did it. She played in the sand with her son. She walked him to the water. She held his hand, and her kid lit up. The little boy was giggling and splashing and having the time of his life with his actual mother. Meanwhile, I sat back, put my feet in the sand, closed my eyes, and finally exhaled. 2 years of running on empty. 1 night of stillness. I earned that. I used to be on my feet all day, working long shifts at a warehouse, moving boxes and loading trucks without breaking a sweat. Then one morning, a forklift malfunction changed everything. I ended up with a spinal injury that left me with limited mobility in my lower body. I can walk short distances, but the pain builds up fast, and standing in one place for too long is its own kind of torture. That is why the store's motor cart has been a lifesaver for me. It is one of those electric scooters with a basket attached to the front that stores keep near the entrance for people who need them. I go to this store specifically because they keep those carts in good condition, and the staff has always been respectful toward me. Grocery shopping used to be something I dreaded after my accident, but I found a rhythm. I go early on weekday mornings when it is quiet. I take my time, and I pick what I need without feeling like I am in anyone's way. The produce section is always my first stop. I take my time there because I'm picky about what I bring home. I check every tomato, squeeze every avocado, and hold every pepper up to the light to make sure it is worth buying. That morning, I had spent a good chunk of time going through the vegetable section. I picked out the best ones I could find and placed them carefully in the basket of the motor cart. Tomatoes, bell peppers, zucchini, a fat bunch of spinach, and some green onions. It was not a huge haul, but I was proud of it because every single piece was perfect. I had moved slightly ahead to check out some herbs when I heard rustling behind me. I turned around and saw a woman standing right next to my cart, reaching in and grabbing my vegetables. She was loading them into her own handheld basket like they were sitting on a display shelf. I spoke up right away and told her those were mine. She did not even look up. I said it again, louder this time, making it clear that I was sitting on that cart and had been using it the whole time I was shopping. She finally looked at me and said that, as far as she was concerned, the cart had just been sitting there unattended, and that maybe I should label my things if I wanted people to know they belonged to me. She said it in that flat, unbothered tone that made it clear she had no intention of giving anything back. I told her she was holding my spinach in her hand, and that it took me time to pick every one of those items out. I asked her to put it all back. She scoffed and told me she had been looking for good spinach for a while now, as if that somehow made what she was doing acceptable. I told her flat out that I did not care, and that it was mine. That was when she said something that made the whole aisle go quiet. She looked me dead in the eye and told me that people like me take up too much space in stores with our motor carts and our accommodations, and that we should be grateful that people like her even allow air breathers like us to exist in the same spaces they shop in. She said it without flinching. Then she grabbed the rest of my carefully picked peppers and turned to walk away. That was when another woman who had been shopping nearby stepped directly in front of her and blocked her path. She had seen everything from the start and was not moving an inch. She told Karen straight up that she had watched her reach into my cart and take everything out of it, and that she was not going anywhere until this was sorted out. Karen tried to talk her way past her, insisting that she was blowing things out of proportion and that it was just vegetables. The other shopper did not buy a word of it and stood her ground. A teenager who had been standing nearby with what looked like his mother pointed at Karen and told his mom that he had seen the whole thing and that the woman had just taken everything out of the cart without asking. That drew even more attention from the people around us. A couple of other shoppers stopped and stayed close watching. Karen looked around at the growing crowd and shifted her tone. She stopped trying to justify herself and went straight to playing the victim. She started screaming, not just raising her voice but full-on screaming right there in the produce section. She threw slurs around about disabled people, complained that stores waste too many resources catering to people who slow everyone else down, and demanded to see a manager at the top of her lungs, claiming she was being harassed and that she deserved better as a paying customer. She also threatened to leave a bad review and said she spent a lot of money in this store every week and expected to be treated accordingly. The other shopper still did not move. She held her ground and kept Karen from getting any further, while a store employee who had been stocking nearby rushed off to get the manager. And then the manager came around the corner. He came around in a wheelchair. He moved through the aisle with a kind of calm that only someone with real authority carries naturally. He had clearly been told about the situation on his way over because he went straight to Karen without hesitating. He introduced himself and told her he had been made aware of what was happening. Then he asked her plainly whether she had taken items out of another customer's cart. Karen stumbled over her words. She tried to argue that the cart had looked unoccupied to her. The manager pointed out that I had been on the cart the entire time, which meant it was clearly in use. Karen had no real answer for that. She then tried a different angle and told him that the store layout made it confusing and that signage near the produce section was unclear, as if that had anything to do with reaching into someone else's cart. The manager did not engage with any of it. He turned to one of the security guards who had followed him over and told him to take Karen's cart. Then he turned to a second guard and told him to keep Karen where she was until the police officers she had called arrived. Karen snapped and told him he had no right to do any of that. The manager told her that she had taken items that did not belong to her and that she had used discriminatory language against the customer and against him personally, and that she would be waiting right there. That was when Karen seemed to register for the first time that the manager himself was in a wheelchair. She went quiet for just a second. Then instead of backing down, she doubled down and said something ugly directed at him specifically, making it clear his position meant nothing to her. The guard took a small step closer. Karen started screaming all over again. She directed more slurs at him than back at me, and kept going even as more employees gathered around. The other shoppers had their phones out by that point. Multiple people were recording everything. One of the employees quietly came over to me and asked if I was okay and whether I needed to sit somewhere more comfortable while things were handled. I told her I was fine and that I wanted to stay and see this through. When the police arrived a few minutes later, one of the officers immediately spoke with the manager and the other shopper who had witnessed everything. Karen tried to tell her version first, but the officer was already being shown phone footage from two different people. She shifted her story twice in the span of about a minute. Then she started screaming at the officers too, repeating the same slurs she had been throwing around since the start. When one of the officers moved to escort her out, she yanked her arm away and refused to go. They warned her to stop resisting. She did not stop. The cuffs went on right there in the produce section. She was still yelling slurs as they walked her out through the store. Several shoppers watched her go without saying a word. The manager came back over to me once she was gone. He apologized for what I had gone through and asked if I was all right. I told him I was. He told me they would get my vegetables replaced and then personally went through the produce section with me to make sure I got everything I had originally picked out. The other shopper who had blocked Karen checked in on me before she left and said she was glad she had been there. I thanked her and meant it. For over 20 years, gas stations were my life. It did not start as a plan. I was 19, trying to pay rent and help my mom with bills after my dad left. The idea was to work for a few months, save up, maybe go to school. But months turned into years, and years stacked up. And before I knew it, 2 decades had passed. I had worked at maybe 8 or 9 different stations over that time. Different brands, different cities, different managers. But one thing stayed the same no matter where I went. Some customers treated you like a person, and some treated you like furniture that happened to talk. I learned early on how to handle the rude ones. You smile, you stay calm. You do not take the bait, because if you react, you lose your job and they walk away fine. That was the unspoken rule of working a register for 20 years. But every rule has its breaking point, and mine had a name I never learned because I never cared to. I just called him what he was, a regular. He started coming in about 3 years into my time at that station, drove a nice car, always dressed well, the kind of guy who looked at you the same way someone looks at a stain on their shirt. He would come in 2 or 3 times a week, always bought the same things: chips, a sandwich from the cooler, sometimes an ice cream bar. Nothing expensive, nothing special. But the way he acted, you would think he owned the place. Every single time, without fail, he would finish opening whatever he bought right there at the counter. He would tear the wrapper off the chips. He would peel back the sandwich plastic. He would strip the wrapper off the ice cream. And then he would just drop them. Not in the trash, not even to the side. He would drop them directly on the floor in front of the register, right in front of me, while looking me in the eye. The first time it happened, I pointed out that the trash can was right there. He told me I got paid to clean up after him, so I should do it. I thought he was joking. He was not joking. He said some version of that same thing every single visit. Every time I suggested he use the bin, he said the same thing back. That was what they paid me for. I would pick up the wrappers every time because I needed the job, because I had bills, because I had learned to smile and absorb it. My co-worker who shared shifts with me noticed it too. She would watch him walk out after every visit and just shake her head. She told me once that she did not know how I kept my mouth shut with that guy. I told her 20 years of practice, but even I had a limit, and that limit had been building for a long time. Our station had a policy for gas purchases. If a customer wanted to pump and pay inside, they had to leave their credit card at the register first. It was a trust system. They hand over the card, go pump, come back and pay. Most people were fine with it. Some people hated it. He hated it more than most. The first time we enforced it with him, he made a whole scene about it. He told me it was an absurd policy and asked why he should have to hand over his card like some kind of criminal. I told him it was store policy and that everyone had to follow it. He stared at me for a long moment, then dropped his card on the counter and walked out without another word. That became the routine. Every time he wanted gas, he would drop the card like he was doing me a favor and walk off to the pump. He did it again. On the afternoon, everything changed. He came in, dropped the card on the counter the way he always did, told me to fill it up, and walked out before I could say anything. I looked down at his card sitting there, and something shifted in me that day. 20 years of picking up wrappers. 20 years of being told I was paid to be treated like that. 20 years of watching guys like him walk out without a second thought. 20 years. I flipped the card over. There was a number on the back. The customer service number for the card company. I picked up the phone and dialed. The person who answered asked how they could help. I told them I had found a credit card on the ground at the gas station and had no idea who it belonged to, and that I just wanted to make sure it got handled properly. They thanked me for doing the right thing and told me they would go ahead and cancel the card and send a new one out to the card holder. I thanked them and hung up the phone. I set the card back down on the counter, and I waited. My co-worker had heard the whole call from the back. She walked up front and looked at me, then looked at the card, then looked back at me. She did not say a word. She just went back to stocking the cooler. About 5 minutes passed. He came back through the door the way he always did, like he was doing the place a favor by being there. He slid up to the counter and told me the amount he owed for the gas he pumped. I picked up his card and ran it through. The machine thought about it for a second. Then the screen came back. Declined. Use another form of payment. I told him his card had been declined and asked if he had another form of payment. He told me to run it again. I did. Declined again. I told him it was still showing declined and that I would need another form of payment for the $45.01 he owed. He looked at the card like something had to be wrong with the machine. He said the card was fine and that there was nothing wrong with it. I told him I understood but that the machine was showing it declined and asked again if he had cash or another card. He stood there for a moment longer, then was comfortable. His jaw tightened. He looked at the line forming behind him. Then he reached into his wallet, pulled out cash, and slapped it on the counter. He did not say another word. He grabbed his receipt and walked out. I counted back his change without blinking. My co-worker appeared beside me the second the door closed behind him. She looked at me and said she could not believe that just happened. I just put the cash in the drawer and told her the card was declined. She laughed under her breath and went back to work. What he did not know yet, standing in that parking lot next to his nice car, was that his card was gone. Not just declined for that transaction. Gone. He would have to call the card company and explain that his card had been reported found. He would have to verify his identity. He would have to answer questions about when and where he last used it. He would have to wait for a new card to arrive in the mail. 2 weeks, give or take. 2 weeks of not having access to that account. All because he thought the person behind the counter was there to be stepped on. He never came back to that station after that day. I do not know if he figured it out or if he just moved on to treating someone else badly somewhere else. Either way, the floor in front of my register stayed clean. I finished my shift that evening like I did any other. Wiped down the counter, swept the floor, took out the trash. The job was the same, but I felt a little lighter doing it. I never planned to become a professor. Back in my home country, I studied aerospace engineering because I loved the idea of designing things that could fly. When I got accepted into a doctoral program at a well-known university in the United States, it felt like the opportunity of a lifetime. I packed everything, left my family behind temporarily, and moved to a country where I barely knew anyone. That was years before any of this happened. By the time I was finishing my doctoral degree, I had already built a solid reputation within the department. I was teaching undergraduate courses, running lab sessions, and students were actually requesting to be in my sections. I had also published research, attended conferences, and done everything you are supposed to do to position yourself well in academia. The department chair noticed. He called me into his office one afternoon and told me the department was opening a visiting assistant professor position. He said he wanted me to apply for it. He had specific courses in mind, courses I was already teaching and knew inside out. He told me I was the right fit and that they needed me there the following fall. I left his office feeling more settled than I had in years. I went home that evening and told my wife. We had a 1-year-old son at the time, barely walking, getting into everything. My wife had been patient through all of it. The late nights, the tight budget, the uncertainty that comes with being an international student in a country that is not your own. This position felt like the first solid ground we had stood on in a long time. I renewed our lease for another year. We started making small plans. Nothing extravagant, just the kind of quiet, hopeful plans a young family makes when they think they finally have some stability. Then May arrived. I got a message from the department chair asking me to stop by his office. I walked in expecting to talk about position details, maybe paperwork or a start date. Instead, he barely looked up from his desk. He told me the position had been canceled. When I asked him to repeat himself, he said it was a budget decision, shrugged like he was telling me the cafeteria had run out of a lunch option, and told me I would need to go figure something else out. I sat there for a moment because I genuinely could not process what he had just said. For someone who is on an international student visa, having employment lined up is not a preference. It is a legal requirement. My optional practical training authorization, which allows international graduates to work in the United States in their field of study, was tied to securing a job. Without a position, I would be looking at having to leave the country entirely. And it was May. Faculty hiring cycles in academia typically run from the fall of 1 year through the winter. By the time spring rolls around, most universities have already extended offers and closed their searches. I was applying for positions that no longer existed. I sent out applications to over 60 universities. The replies that came back were almost identical. Email after email saying the position had already been filled or that they were not accepting applications at this time. Some did not even bother to reply. I kept applying anyway because what else was I supposed to do? My wife was trying to stay calm for our son's sake, but I could see it on her face every evening when I came home with nothing new to report. We had already signed a new lease. We were stuck in an apartment we could no longer afford to stay in and could not easily leave. To make things worse, the clock on my optional practical training authorization was running. Every week that passed without a job offer was a week closer to being forced out of the country with a wife and a toddler and no plan. Then 2 responses came in that were different from the rest. One was from a university in the same state offering a position in mechanical engineering. Not aerospace, which is my specific area, but close enough that I could teach the material competently. The second was from a university much farther away offering a position directly in aerospace engineering, my actual field, but it was far, a different part of the country, away from the small network my wife and I had quietly built over the years. I sat with my wife and we talked it through for a long time. I told her the aerospace position was the better fit on paper. She pointed out that the other one kept us where we already were. We thought about our son, about stability, about not uprooting everything again for a field-specific title. We chose to stay. I accepted the mechanical engineering position, paid a significant fee to break the lease we had just renewed, and moved our family to a new city within the same state. The lease break alone cost us several $1,000s we did not have to spare. It was not easy, but something unexpected happened once I settled in. The university was small but genuinely supportive. My colleagues were collaborative, students were engaged. I was given the room to develop my own courses and build something rather than just fill a slot someone else had vacated. I was productive in ways I had not expected. I started publishing again, got involved in departmental committees, and began advising graduate students for the first time. A year into the position, the university offered me a tenure-track assistant professorship. Not a visiting role, not a temporary contract. A real, permanent position with a path forward. Then the department told me something that made everything feel like it had come full circle. The university was launching an aerospace engineering degree program in the upcoming fall semester. My field. Built from the ground up, and I would be a core part of shaping it. I was heavily involved in the curriculum design, the hiring recommendations, and the outreach to prospective students. For the first time since arriving in this country, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was still sitting with all of that when I attended a major conference in my area of research. I was walking through the hall between sessions when I spotted a familiar face, my former department chair. He saw me at the same moment and walked over with a smile like we were old colleagues catching up. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was better than fine, actually. I told him about the tenure-track position. I told him about the new aerospace engineering program launching in the fall. I watched his expression shift when the pieces came together for him. He asked with a slight smirk if that made me his competitor now. I looked at him for a moment. His university was private and expensive. Mine was public, more affordable, more accessible, and now offering the exact same specialized degree his institution had been struggling to staff properly since I left. I told him we were not just competitors. I told him I knew his university had been having trouble covering the courses I used to teach, because I had heard word travels in academic circles. I told him that since his school charged private university rates and mine was public, I planned to recruit those students directly into my program. I also mentioned that I had already been in contact with a few faculty members from his department who were quietly looking for opportunities elsewhere. His smirk faded. He had nothing to say to that, so I told him one more thing before I walked away. I thanked him. He looked confused and asked why. I told him that if he had not cut me loose the way he did, I probably would have spent years stuck in a visiting position with no job security and no real future. Instead, he pushed me out the door at the worst possible time, and it forced me to land somewhere that actually valued what I had to offer. I nodded once and walked away. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.